Hey, everybody, welcome to the Lovecraft eZine podcast. This is our annual Halloween show. So, this is October the 28th, 2018, and Halloween is in 3 days. And as usual, the Lovecraft eZine tradition is that I do a podcast with Jeff Thomas and Scott Thomas. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Mike.
Hey. So, real quick for those listening, I know we probably have a lot of new listeners since last year. Can you guys just tell us about yourself in 30-second snapshot of yourself, something like that? Go ahead, Jeff. You start.
Okay, I'll start because I'm the older of us two. Jeffrey Thomas. I write horror, science fiction, weird fiction. My most recent books were short story collections that came out 2017. They were The Endless Fall from Lovecraft eZine Press and Haunted Worlds from Hippocampus Press.
Okay, Scott, go ahead.
Okay, I've been writing since I was a kid. I have 10 published books. A lot of my fiction is ghostly and set in the past in New England, and I'm the author of The Sea of Ash.
From
Right.
Lovecraft eZine Press.
And I'm Mike Davis. I run the Lovecraft eZine and its various projects. So we're just, we don't really have what we want to do in these shows is basically get everybody in the Halloween spirit. So if you're not in the Halloween spirit, hopefully you will be after you listen to this show.
Mm-hmm.
So last year we had a bit of a problem. I was so fascinated listening to stories from you guys, and we had a technical difficulty, and I didn't get to hear the rest of them. So there's one thing we can talk about. Jeff, you suggested also true life paranormal events that have happened to other people and that sort of thing. But before we get there, why don't we all talk about our Halloween rituals? Because I know that both of you guys every year feel like you have to do certain things to get yourself in the Halloween spirit. So, Jeff, what are your traditions?
I try to limit it now because it gets to the point where sometimes if you can't fit everything in because your life circumstances might not be the same every year, it creates like an anxiety. Oh, this year I didn't get to watch this movie, or I didn't get to listen, read this story that I traditionally. So I try to keep it pared down. But one of my traditions is to listen to scary CDs. They used to be audio tapes, and I usually listen to them in the car or on my computer sometimes. So I have a whole stack of Halloween-oriented CDs I like to listen to. Some of them are creepy music, but some of them are stories like, for instance, one of my favorites is Closed on Account of Rabies. It's a 2-album set of Edgar Allan Poe stories read by people like Christopher Walken and Iggy Pop. It's really cool. It's really well done.
Yeah.
Amanda Gallus is one of my favorites in there. She did The Black Cat. That's probably the highlight of it. So that's a big part of it, is listening to CDs that I like. One of my traditions every year that I like to do is to take my kids to Salem, Mass, which is like a Halloween Mardi Gras this time of year. It's just amazing there. But I didn't go this year because I really couldn't afford it. You can't go to that without having money to eat and buy souvenirs and all the countless haunted attractions and whatnot. So unfortunately I couldn't make it this year. But that is one of my traditions too. And so other traditions are loose, and they're probably very comparable to what other people do, is just try to fit in as many scary movies as I can, or the typical things like making jack-o'-lanterns and whatnot, and just trying to get into that ambiance,
Yeah. What about you, Scott?
Well, like Jeffrey, I would find myself overburdened with traditions that I felt I had to do, and to where it would give me anxiety. And so over the years, it's become a lot fewer things that I really have to do. Uh, in the past, I would have to watch the John Carpenter Halloween, but presently, I really feel I need to listen to the old radio play, The House in Cypress Canyon.
Oh yeah.
I listened to it today.
Did you?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Favorite.
Yeah.
And I love to watch Charlie Brown, The Great Pumpkin, and there's a short story from Twilight Zone magazine. It was from the November '82 issue, right here. It's a story called Halloween Girl, and it's really beautiful and ghostly and evocative of all what Halloween means to me. So I really have to read that for it to be Halloween.
Who was the
And so
author of that again?
Halloween Girl.
Yeah, who's the author?
Oh, the author. Oh gosh, what's his name? I should know. Richard Grant?
Richard what?
Robert Grant.
Oh,
Robert Grant.
Robert Grant.
oh wow. Mhm.
I'm so glad that you brought up Charlie Brown, you know, and also The House in Cypress Canyon, which if someone asked me, hey, what should I start with? I've never listened to an old time radio show before. What episode, what series should I start with? And if you like horror, you're into Halloween, all that good stuff. I would probably start with that one. The House in Cypress Canyon. It's on the Suspense radio show.
Yes.
And all you have to do is Google it. It's available to listen to for free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on YouTube you can easily see it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very, very strange story, and I don't want to give any of it away other than to say that unlike a lot of stories, in fact, even unlike a lot of good stories, The House in Cypress Canyon keeps you thinking about it.
Yeah.
What actually happened here? That type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. And the framing device is so good for that story.
Oh, yeah. So we won't spoil it, but you should listen to it.
Definitely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any other traditions for you, Scott, or did you list them all?
Well, there's a bunch, but those are the major ones that that I really have to do now. If I don't get to any others, those two are essential.
Well, as for me, I live in Texas now. I used to live in Iowa. And this time of year in Iowa, it's usually, typically a lot of leaves on the ground, a lot of color, cold temperatures and rain and that sort of thing. And I would love to go for walks in that. Here in Texas, you don't really get that. Although I will say it's been very nice here the last week or so. Been in the 50s and 60s, so that's cool for Texas in October. But I love walking, looking at the leaves. Another thing I like to do every year is watch a TV episode called "The Curse of Frank Black." Do you guys remember the Millennium TV show by Chris Carter?
I never followed it. I never watched it. But that Frank Black was Lance Henriksen, right?
Yes, that's right. Well, first of all, it's a good TV show. Lasted 3 seasons. But in the second season, there's a Halloween episode, and it's called The Curse of Frank Black. And it's very atmospheric, very good story. And I don't know, I just have to watch it every year. Just one of those traditions. And of course, listen to a lot of old-time radio shows, Halloween themed. So
yeah.
So great. I'm sorry, I did forget one very important one. My Halloween night tradition is that I stay up and listen to the Coast to Coast show. I know they have a lot of weird people on there and stuff, but on Halloween night they do Ghost to Ghost, where the show is mostly people calling in telling their supposedly true ghost stories. So that's what I do Halloween night. I have to do that.
That's great. That's still live every year?
Yes, it's on the Coast to Coast radio show. George Norrie is the host, and Every year they do the Ghost to Ghost episode on Halloween night.
Yeah, it used to be Art Bell, wasn't it?
Yes.
Um, so the House in Cypress Canyon would be a good start if you want old time radio shows to be part of your tradition every year. Another one is on the show Quiet Please, and the episode is titled Northern Lights. That's a really good one and a really creepy one, and a bit Lovecraftian in a way.
I'll have to check that out.
Mm.
And of course, you guys listen to the Hall of Fantasy?
No.
That was in the early 50s, and it's one of the best produced shows.
Really?
Yeah.
I know by name. I may have caught something on there.
Well, I would start with the Hall of Fantasy episode, The Shadow People.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's real good.
I may have played that after you suggested it, I believe.
I've got a couple more. And of course, there's many. I could list them for the rest of the show probably, but I'll just mention two more. Another one on Quiet Please. There Are Shadows Here.
Mm-hmm.
And then Vincent Price did a radio show. Believe it was the 70s, but I don't quote me on that. Called The Price of Fear. So it was a very good show, and I love. He could recite his laundry list, and I don't listen to that. But this particular episode is called Fish. So, yeah, Google those if you're listening. You're not into old time radio.
Oh, I love
these are good, and they're all free. It's free entertainment.
I used to one of my traditions when I used audio tapes instead of CDs was I had it was a 2-part episode of Suspense. I believe it was Suspense, and it was Orson Welles doing Donovan's Brain.
Oh, yeah.
And that was very good.
Yeah.
My daughter saw me today. She was listening a little bit to the House on Cypress Canyon. She said, "Daddy, the screen's all black. There's no pictures." And I said, "That's the point. This is just something you listen to." It was kind of an alien thing to her. You're just listening to the story. There is no accompanying visuals. You got to picture it, and maybe it will be more scary that way.
A company called Graphic Audio, they do a lot of superhero audio plays, DC and Marvel. I've got several of their DC ones, which obviously I love it. But their phrase is, "It's a movie in your mind."
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
So I like that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You guys, I was talking to you earlier about a book that I found at a garage sale when I was a kid called Stranger Than Science by Frank Edwards.
Yeah.
And Jeff, you remembered that you had read it too. I don't know if you have, Scott, or not, but
yes.
Sorry?
Oh, yeah, yes. We had those books as kids.
Yeah. The ones I remember most vividly were Strange People and Strange World.
Yeah. Well, this is a neat book, and as a kid, I took it at face value that they said everything in here was true, and I thought, okay, so it must be true. It's in a book. Of course, when you're older and you live in the internet age, you can actually look these things up.
Mm-hmm.
One of the stories that really impressed me the most was the first story, The Mystery of David Lang. And it's about this guy in 1880 who is waving to his family from somewhere in the field. He's in the field and they're coming up or something. They're driving up or something. And he just disappears just like that. And of course, I got on the internet today to refresh my memory, and there's nothing to back this up. It probably didn't happen. But the neat thing is that it led me to Ambrose Bierce.
Oh.
And I was not, of course, we all know who Ambrose Bierce is, great writer. But I was not aware that he disappeared.
Yes.
And I'm like, is this true? I got on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia has documented it as well. I'll just read you a line because it's just really creepy. Bierce is known to have accompanied Villa's army as far as the city of, I'm going to mispronounce this, Chua. His last known communication with the world was a letter that he wrote to Blanche Partington, a close friend, dated December 26th, 1913. After closing this letter by saying, "As to me, I leave here tomorrow for an unknown destination," he vanished without a trace, his disappearance being one of the most famous in American literary history. So, I mean, I knew about Ambrose Bierce, most of us horror readers and writers do, but I didn't know he just disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is mysterious. From what little I know, I always assumed he died in the war that he was involved with or whatever. But it is very mysterious. That story you're telling though about David Lang, that first story in that Stranger Than Science, that is a creepy story.
It is. Fact or fiction, it is a very creepy story.
Mm-hmm.
And I before the show, I read you the ending of that, which I won't spoil for anyone. I'm sure there's plenty of used copies of this book on Amazon. And again, for those listening later on that can't see the book, it's Stranger Than Science by Frank Edwards. So,
his books used to scare the hell out of me as a kid, but they were so, and like you, I took them at face value. I thought they were absolutely real, I don't know how many there might have been a germ of truth in, or if any, but definitely entertaining reading.
Yeah, definitely. So I do want to get again into paranormal events or possible paranormal events that have happened to you guys, because as I said last year, I was so fascinated, and then we had that glitch. So, but before we do that, you wanted to talk about paranormal events that have happened to other people, Jeff, and you mentioned Colin Wilson.
Mm-hmm. Scott probably introduced me to Colin Wilson. He's such a fascinating writer. He passed away a couple of years ago, I believe.
Yes.
And he's so intriguing to me that when I named my son, I named him Colin, not so much as a tribute, but Colin Wilson's being on my mind, his name occurred to me. But Colin Wilson was fascinating. He was a British writer. He, as a young man, he wrote a book called The Outsider. I guess it's a philosophical text. And I don't know if he was inspired by Lovecraft's story to name it The Outsider, because he was very interested in Lovecraft. But he was a true crime writer, and he was a novelist. And he wrote the novels. He wrote the novel Space Vampires that they made the film Light Force from. And he wrote a novel that I read called The Philosopher's Stone, which was fascinating because it's about these two men who were both trying to increase their perception, their vision. And in the course of this, and they go through this long, convoluted journey, and then trying to open their mind's eye wider and wider. And in the course of that, at the end, it becomes extremely Lovecraftian, where they can see into time, and they see all these Lovecraftian experiences that would remind you quite a bit of At the Mountains of Madness. And so it's a fascinating novel. Perhaps the approach is a little dry, but that's what I liked about it, because it almost reads like a book of nonfiction. And but he would write a lot about the paranormal and mysterious things. And maybe he was a little too credulous, but he would definitely stimulate your imagination. And he definitely has left an impression on me and inspired me a lot. Before Colin Wilson, I had never read or heard anything about the tulpas, thought forms, Tibetan thought forms, or the Men in Black, or the Philadelphia experiment, or ley lines. And these were all things that I first encountered through reading Colin Wilson. And so he is a fascinating writer, and inspired Scott and I quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And it was his book Mysteries that introduced me to Colin Wilson from you. So you had the book.
Oh, really? Okay, I can't even quite remember. But he would come up with interesting things like the food for thought, like perhaps the Loch Ness Monster and UFOs are not an actual physical manifestation, but kind of a thought form projected by the collective unconscious. We're accessing imagery through our collective unconscious instead of there being an actual aquatic creature. And this is based on our belief in dragons or racial, ancestral memories or whatever. And maybe these occurrences could occur more readily on a ley line or some energy force that would enable this to happen. And these are the kinds of things that he would talk about. And whether you believe it literally or not, it would, like I said, it would stimulate your imagination.
Yeah. And a paranormal event doesn't always have to be this scary thing. I've got a true story to tell that has happened in the last year, and is still happening.
Hmm.
As I think a lot of my listeners know, my family and I have had a bit of a rough year, quite a lot of a rough year. But one of the several things that happened was one of our cats died, and we really, really loved this cat. We love all our animals. And he was a little guy. His name was George. And we found George and his brother Charlie at the same time and took them in. Actually, my son and my wife found him. And we've had him 7 or 8 years. And so every night when my wife and I got into bed, George would run up on the bed and lay on my wife's chest and sort of, with his paws out like this and just start purring, and would stay there probably 10 minutes. And then sometimes he would do the same thing to me, sometimes not, but he always did it to my wife. And, we called it, George is tucking us in at night. So it was pretty cute. I've never seen a cat do something like that. So about, I guess it's been 2 or 3 months ago, George died. And about a week later, I think, suddenly his brother Charlie started doing the exact same thing. He jumped on the bed when we got into bed and laid on my wife's chest and did exactly what George did.
Wow.
For 5 or 10 minutes, then he'd tuck Danielle in just like George had done it, and then he'd run off when he was done. And this happens almost every night now. And I find it kind of flabbergasting. It's almost like George said, "Hey, I'm not going to be here much longer. Take over my job."
Gee.
Or I honestly have no explanation for it.
That is interesting.
And perhaps there is some mundane explanation but I'm racking my brain and I can't find one.
Gee.
So strange things can happen that are not necessarily
scary.
Yeah, but
mysterious.
But yeah, very mysterious. Yeah, I simply don't understand it. So
I think I try to keep an open mind, but I'm also a skeptic. But I think that most of the things that we think of as paranormal or supernatural or scary occurrences would be benign, but it's just unknown to us, and that is what frightens us. It's I don't know how much, if there are such things as ghosts, I don't think too many of them would actually be malicious.
Yeah, it's the fear of the unknown, as Lovecraft wrote. So.
If you weren't familiar with a giraffe and you saw one walk out of the woods, you would think it would be the most terrifying thing you could envision.
Yeah, what is this animal with the super long neck?
Yeah,
never seen anything like that before. So that's something kind of strange and mysterious that's happened to our family recently.
Intriguing.
Yeah, like I said, I don't have an explanation for it. If anybody out there does, write the podcast, Lovecraft eZine at gmail.com. But it's really cool. And I think it's helping George was really, we all love George, but he was kind of my wife's cat. So I think this is helping to heal my wife's heart a bit. I hope so anyway. Which brings up paranormal events, or possibly paranormal events, strange things, whatever, that have happened to you guys.
I know we were relating once we get excited about it, we start going on a roll. So I don't even remember what we talked about.
I don't think it matters because I've got a lot of new viewers since last year, so you can tell anything and everything. So,
wow, what do you think, Scott? What would be like some of the most profound ones that?
Also, you can probably hear this. My voice has been going the last couple of days, so the more you guys talk, the better.
Oh gosh. Well, there was the Burlington house, Aunt Barbara.
Yeah. just because of the sheer amount of things that happened there, and our father, the things he experienced, and my aunt experienced. My father used to say that when he was he was there one time and he was in a chair and he looked up and there was a figure standing in front of him. My aunt had a little room where she did business work, and she said a little boy would stand there and watch her.
Mm.
And the dog would act crazy and look like it was looking at stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And what else was it, Scott? It was
Dad saw something levitate off the mantle.
Oh, wow.
And they would, and this is kind of weird, but I remember somebody saying once that every time, was it Aunt Barbara would take a sip of beer, they would hear a little giggle or something.
That sounds familiar.
I don't, yeah.
Now, that would be really creepy, especially if it happened at night. So what I'd like us to do is pretend we're sitting around a campfire. Let's do a virtual campfire here, and it's us three and all the listeners, and you guys have some strange stories to tell that I'd like to hear. If that's all right with you.
Sure.
Well, what about Cottage Street, Scott? All the stuff that happened there.
Oh,
my sister, at one time, my sister lived downstairs and Scott lived upstairs. And later on, I bought this house from my sister and I lived downstairs. My mom lived upstairs. But when my sister lived there, one time I remember she told me she was passing from one room into another. And as she was doing so, there was kind of like smoke in front of her. And she waved her arms like to dispel the smoke. And as she passed the threshold, she realized, how could there be smoke? What is that? And she turned around and it was gone. The funny thing about it is that her son saw the same thing. He was there and witnessed this occurrence, which was kind of strange. And also, like here, she told me one time she put her hand on a doorknob and the doorknob shifted in her hand. And I remember there's a whole bunch of stories about that house. I remember one time I was lying when the house was mine. I was lying in bed with my wife and looking toward the doorway, and saw this face like come leaning in, like look at us, pull back out again.
Wow.
And we both seemed to see it. We were like freaking out, and I jumped. There's nobody there, but my wife and I both reacted to it. It was weird. Another time I was lying in bed with my eyes closed, but I was awake and I felt the bed depress. And I thought, what is Rose doing home from work? I thought it was like somebody just sat down on the bed, and I opened my eyes. There was nobody there. Another time I was passing through the kitchen and we had a stove with gas burners, and I heard like a voice of an old woman whisper in my ear. And I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the meaning was to look at the stove. And I saw that the burners had blown out. But that was my understanding, even though I couldn't understand the words. And it was just like an old woman whispering in my ear about it.
Amazing.
God, that house had a lot of weird occurrences. I was too afraid to go down in the basement unless I called my dog to go down with me, you know.
The Coyne incident.
Coyne, that's the big one, right? That's the and I'm sure I've discussed it here before, but so I'll go through it quickly. It was the one.
You don't have to go through quickly, but it was the big one you said?
It was the big one for me because it was personal. It was the 1-year anniversary of my father's death, and my son was very young at the time, and he's autistic, and we didn't tell him it was the anniversary. We didn't mention it, didn't discuss it all day. So he and I are sitting at my computer desk, the one I'm sitting at now, and over on the side was a bedroom that we only used for storage, and it was all dark. So my son is standing beside me, looking at something I'm showing him on the screen, and suddenly he looks toward that doorway, and he goes, "Grandpa," with happy recognition, you know, and the goosebumps rose on me, the hair rose on my neck, and I looked toward that room, expecting to see my father there, and I even went in, and there was nothing, but it was just the way he said that, and with recognition and surprise, and on the 1-year anniversary of my father's death, just so weird,
amazing.
And this was all in these all took place in one house. A lot of occurrences there.
There was a partial figure seen on the stairs that went up to the second floor apartment. And that time I saw some misty something over the sink in the little kitchen when I was in the apartment upstairs.
And didn't you say somebody was standing like looking at the microwave like they didn't know what it was or something? Or
That wasn't me, but I do remember there was a workman was putting in a back door. It didn't have, it only had one entrance to be a legal apartment. It needed a second door. And the workman, he's putting a second door in the living room. And he was working and he had his hand in the wall space between the outer wall and inner wall, and something yanked the screwdriver out of his hand and it
What?
freaked him out. It was gone,
Wow.
just gone.
Wow, I didn't hear that story. Oh my God, that's creepy. There was definitely something going on with that house.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And then,
everything you guys have just related was all in this one house?
Yeah.
yes.
Wow. Okay.
And in a house next door to that, where we were growing up, there was some weird stuff too. When we were children, we lived in two houses down from there, and that place had weird occurrences as well.
Yeah, that's right. The books on the landing, whatever.
Flying books flying out of the bedroom. Jeffrey and I were kids, and actually, I instigated it in a way. I was upstairs alone, and it was kind of creepy up there. We sort of pretended there was a Civil War ghost in our sister Wendy's room, and so whenever we'd go in that room, we would have to sing, "I'm glad I'm not in Dixie," because it was a northern ghost, So it wasn't a southern ghost; it was a northern ghost. So we'd have to say that. Well, anyway, I'm in our Jeffrey and I shared a room, and there was a bookcase our grandfather had made. So this weird bookcase. It was sort of flesh colored paint, but there was a book in it that was kind of creepy to me. Being a kid, you're so sensitive. It's like, oh, there's that ghost book. It's a book about hauntings, and I believe it came from Burlington, where our aunt had the haunted house we were talking about. At any rate, a book fell over or something in the bookcase, and it freaked me out. So I'm like calling Jeffrey, and so I took some books and flung them out the doorway onto the landing, and I was going to say a ghost was throwing books because I wanted to didn't want to seem like a wimp, and I wanted to say, oh, that's why I'm calling you, because some books were flying. So
let me interrupt. How old were both of you when this happened?
Oh wow.
We left in 73, Craig said, or so 10 or so thereabouts for me.
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe I was maybe 12, you were maybe 10.
Okay, all right, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
And so I flung the books out and I called to Jeffrey. Jeffrey comes partway up the stairs and I'm up there, and the books we both see books flying out of the room.
Now they are actually coming out onto the landing.
And we both saw this, books flying out of that room by themselves.
You actually saw this happen?
Yeah.
I don't know if I was psychokinetically
that's incredible.
Moving them or what, but
if I was going to be credulous about this, I would think that you did it with your, because people, if poltergeist phenomenon is real, people suggest that it's actually created from the turbulent energies of like an adolescent or
right. Whitney Colin Wilson had that theory about poltergeist.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen in some psychology books where they would, entertain the possibility of
yes. Yeah.
I was about to tell a joke from Ghostbusters. You're right. No human being would stack books like this. So before you go on with more stories, I hope anyway, what are your opinions on the paranormal and possible afterlife and so forth? Are you agnostic, or do you believe in it? Or
I'm an agnostic. I tend not to believe in an afterlife until I think of a story like something I've seen myself with my son reacting like that. And but I'm very skeptical. And as I've gotten older, I've become more skeptical about the possibility of the paranormal and supernatural and cryptozoology and everything. I get ever more cynical and believe less, but my mind hasn't closed entirely.
Well, I think one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about a true skeptic who, wants to see evidence for something before they believe in it is, they think skeptical means closed-minded. It doesn't. It just means that if you make a claim, then I want to see evidence that it's true. You could tell me, hey, the moon is made out of green cheese. If you can prove that to me, then I'll quote unquote believe it.
Yeah, and more so, and I might really want that to be true. So
Yeah.
please convince me, because I don't want to disprove it. But I want to believe it, but I need more to believe it. So please convince me.
Right, and when you really want to believe in something, you have to be extra careful that evidence, it's not leading you where you want; it's leading where it should lead.
Yeah.
So, but regardless, these are such fun things to think about and talk about.
For sure.
Either way, whether they're true or not. You guys say you saw books flying around. Obviously, it happened. Do we know why? No, but
And it's all the more compelling when multiple people witness it. There's
Yeah.
always a possibility you're convincing each other that you've witnessed it, but and I remember we definitely told this story before. It was in that same house with the books and everything, the house on Cottage Street. That should be a radio play. Scott, we're in a kitchen now, but although the only problem here is that Scott remembers it's happening in a different house. But we looked and we saw my sister walk by in a nightgown, and she was like walking by, almost like she was sleepwalking. And like a second later, she walks by again, but like it was like an all white version of her. It was like the impression I always get was like it was her soul trying to catch up with her body.
Yeah.
And we were like, we both remember having witnessed this, although I remember it happening at Cottage Street, and you remember it happening where, Scott?
South Street.
South Street.
Yes.
Interesting.
I think that doppelganger stories are one of the most creepy types of stories. A good doppelganger story is very creepy. So, like that. Did you guys see Lake Mungo?
Yes. Yes.
Wow, that's a creepy movie.
I'd like to see that again. Yeah, I saw that.
Let me get back to Scott. Are you a skeptic as well, or what are your feelings on the subject?
I know that logically it seems absurd to consider a lot of what's supernatural, but with the experiences I've had and heard of my whole life, it's as bizarre as it seems. It's hard to deny things that you experience, and like living in a haunted house. I lived in a very haunted house, and my experiences there, it's really good proof that there's things we don't understand. Who knows what it is, if it's actual souls carrying on after people die or what, but there's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we don't know about our world and the universe. Like, I believe in astrology shouldn't make sense at all, but I'm convinced that there's something to it. So I'm sort of like that about the supernatural and hauntings and life after death. I mean, there's compelling evidence that bleeds over into the level of proof to me subjectively, and so I don't know if there's a God or anything. I'm not really. I don't really consider myself spiritual. I have in the past, and when I was into paganism for years, there were strange things that I experienced during that. But I think there's a lot we don't know about our reality that might just be natural, but we call it supernatural simply because the world used to be flat, and it's not. Although, well, some people still believe it is.
Some people are sliding backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you experience something for yourself, something strange, unusual, paranormal, then you've seen it, but that doesn't necessarily, and that may count as evidence for you, obviously, because you've seen it, but it's not evidence for someone else. It's just anecdotal. So.
And I question myself about the things I've seen. I try to be hard on myself. I remember as a boy, I woke up and I saw a figure at the end of my bed, and it looked like it was holding a flashlight. And I called out to it. I thought it was my mother, and it didn't answer. And I called out. I thought it was my father, and it gradually vanished. And I kept calling, and my father came in the room, and I asked him, "Were either of you in here?" And he said no. At the time, it terrified me. But now I have to consider more likely that was a hypnagogic episode, or where you think you're entirely awake, but you're not. And I'm more inclined toward believing that was the case. So I try to be really critical about even the circumstances that I've experienced. But some, things are really provocative.
Hard to explain away.
We worked at a haunted factory in our hometown.
Yeah, both of us worked.
A lot of weird. Well, I had a ghost sighting there. A lot of people saw figures, and there was one time I worked the night shift, and we were working like a weekend. A very small crew, just a handful of us were coming in at a time we wouldn't normally come in, earlier than usual, or I believe, or at any rate, a few of us would come into the building, and we heard somebody walking upstairs, and the building, no one was there. We were just coming in to work in this plastics molding factory, which was early 1900s, a big old brick mill building, very, very old structure. At any rate, we hear somebody walking upstairs, and me and another guy go dashing up the stairs to the second floor. As soon as we opened the door to the second floor, a radio came on right at that moment.
Wow.
And I was there on a Saturday, and again, very few people were there. I was there was a room where the plastic molding of parts took place, and beyond that was a big room full of tables where people would sand the edges of the plastic parts that we produced. Well, I was on a break. I'm standing there in a doorway, open doorway to the outside, having a cigarette, and I happen to glance over into that big sanding room, and I see a person with a pale blue T-shirt, indistinct face, but a figure, clearly a figure behind one of these tables. And there was a big plastic like computer housing back in the day when computers. This was in the late 70s. There's a figure behind a table, the pieces on the table, and I look in, and it wasn't peripheral. It wasn't a split second. I saw a figure, and it moved. Say this hand is the plastic part, and here's the figure. It kind of like moved behind the part as I'm looking, and then it suddenly occurred to me, wait a minute, there's just like us molder guys over here in the production area. There's nobody in that room today. I dashed in there and looked. There was no time for anyone to get to either of the exits from where that table was. And did I get chills? I went over to my coworkers, and they must have thought I was nuts. I went, I saw a.
Yeah, wow.
Very bizarre.
Well, this leads me into the next topic I'd like to discuss with you guys. What about ghost story movies? What are some of your favorites? And just 1 second, Kim Smeltzer is watching live, and she said that she likes my pumpkin back here. So thanks, Kim. And then I also wanted to show everybody that's watching this little guy here that my wife got me not too long ago.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. A candle's supposed to go on this side. And for those listening, it says Boney Holmes, as in Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
And he's about to open the door to go into a room, I guess.
Wow. Is that the Hound of the Baskervilles within there?
Yeah, I don't know. It could be. But it's very cute, and I love it.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So, ghost story movies. Any come to mind for you guys off the top of your head?
I just finished watching the Netflix Haunting of Hill House, and I have very mixed feelings about it. It had some really effective jump scares. There was one that almost made me freaking jump out of my skin.
Mixed feelings, yes, absolutely.
But I don't want to spoil it. I mean, a lot of people like it. Some people, the last episode to me, I don't know, but I had really mixed feelings about it. I thought, it engaged me enough to keep watching. I wanted to keep watching it, but then again, I kept wanted to keep watching the second season of True Detective, but it wasn't as exciting to me as the first episode, the first series. But anyways, I'll just say as a palate cleanser, after I finished watching it, I had to watch Robert Wise's The Haunting with Julie Christie.
There you go.
Yeah, I had to watch it afterwards. It's kind of, you know.
The ending of episode 5, and again, no spoilers, but the ending of episode 5, in regards to the bent neck lady, I really loved that.
I liked that a lot. That made sense to me and very effective.
Yeah, I really, really liked that.
Part of the problem for me was that the only characters that I liked, and I'm not saying characters have to always be likable, they have to just be interesting. But I like Nell, I like the addict brother, even though he's frustrating, and I like Timothy Hutton as the father. So that kept me engaged too, the humanity of those characters, and some of the other characters were pretty irritating.
I think if the last episode was better, most of my mixed feelings would not be there. That last episode was just
agreed. If it had
not good.
Yeah, I don't want to talk. I'm sure there are a lot of people who haven't seen it yet, and I don't want to. Some of them love that. And
absolutely.
And that's great. That's fine.
Yeah.
But
what else have you watched lately, or what else do you watch for? Oh, you mentioned Halloween 3.
Halloween 3. It's not a ghost movie, but it's. I watched it again last night. I hadn't seen it in maybe 30 years, whatever, and I really enjoyed it because it's really gonzo. It's really really interesting and creepy and weird and so different from the other Halloween movies. I could see why people wouldn't. It would rub people the wrong way because it would definitely be not what you're expecting. They should just call it Season of the Witch. Don't even call it Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. It's just take it as its own movie, but it's really weird and creepy and fun, you know.
I like your pumpkin in the background too, Jeff.
No, thanks. Yeah,
lit up like that in the dark. That's great.
I carved that for my son yesterday.
Oh, you did. Very nice.
I asked my children to I don't want them playing with the knives and stuff, but I said, draw what you want me to put on your pumpkin. And my son, I think his is kind of a little inspired by Jack Skellington. My daughter's is over here, and it's inspired by Yoshi. That was a little challenge, but I pulled off a Yoshi. At least that's she draws Yoshi.
Any other ghost story movies?
The Others is really good.
Yes.
You know what I love is it's like a lurid version of The Haunting of Hill House is the Haunting of Hell House, the Richard Matheson novel. That's a really creepy movie.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've not
seen it.
Right.
Somehow that's fallen through the cracks. I'm gonna have to see that one.
Very good.
That's a scary one for me. When I was a kid, that was freaking mega scary.
Oh, yeah.
And The Innocents, based on The Turn of the Screw. That movie is really creepy.
Oh. One of my favorite movies in general of all time, The Innocents.
All right, I'm gonna have to rent that. And along with Season of the Witch, Halloween 3.
The Innocents is very subtle, you know. And I don't know if I was a young person today I have a friend, and he told me he showed The Exorcist to his daughter, and his daughter thought The Exorcist was boring. I'm like, oh my God, I can't imagine today how people. Oh. I don't know if a young person and you hear people say today, oh, 2001: Space Odyssey, what a snooze fest. It's like, what? That's like saying walking through the Louvre would be a snooze fest. But I mean, I'm not young.
Right.
You know, that's their reaction. It's legitimate. It's just I can't relate to it, you know.
While we're on the subject of movies, and it doesn't have to be just ghost story movies, one of the live listeners asks, what are Jeffrey and Scott's top favorite Halloween must-see movies?
Well, the movie Halloween, John Carpenter Halloween, I was almost, in my younger days when Halloween was like a religion to me. It was insane. I would have to watch it very ritualistically. I had to watch it every year, at least once, several times. I would have to have like little candy bars there for atmosphere or jack-o'-lantern by the TV. And so I had to see that.
I don't have any must-see Halloween movies. I was a lot more when I was younger, I tended to watch movies. I could watch movies over and over, and I would have to watch movies over and over. This is before, you got to remember, before HBO and everything. When a movie like Deer Hunter would come on Stars or whatever it was, I would have to watch it every time because I didn't know I wasn't gonna have a VHS tape or a DVD to watch it again. So I would make myself watch it every time it was on, not knowing when I might see it in the future.
Right.
But now, as I've gotten older, I want to watch movies repeatedly less. There are certain ones that I can watch again and again, like Drive, for whatever reason, or No Country for Old Men, and now Mandy. I mean, I've seen it twice already. I could see it again tomorrow, you know. But for the most part, I tend not to rewatch things. If anything, nowadays I'm rewatching movies that I haven't seen in decades. You know? But
Kelly Young had some really good things to say about Mandy. He loved it.
That's my favorite movie I've seen recently. And
Really?
in another person's hands, that same script would just be a trashy revenge story. But it's the direction, the stylishness, and the approach that gives it this cosmic, epic quality, and the quirky performances by Linus Roach and Nicolas Cage and whatnot. So it's my favorite movie right now. I love it.
Oh,
It's an experience.
cool.
It was playing for a couple nights in Providence, and I wish I would love to see it on a big screen.
Ooh. Ghost Story is one of my favorite ghost movies.
Based on Peter Straub's novel.
Oh yes, that is a really good movie. Ghost Story. There's a new movie out called Ghost Stories, plural, with I'm blanking on his name. He played Dr. Watson in Sherlock.
Not Judy.
And he was the Martin Freeman.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a really good movie. Ghost Stories. I encourage everybody to watch it. I really, really enjoyed it. And some might disagree with me. I think some just absolutely love the ending, the way it turned out. I didn't, but that's just a personal thing. You know, you might love it. But it is a very good movie, Ghost Stories.
Interesting.
Also, The Woman in Black with Daniel Radcliffe. I love that one.
I haven't seen that one. It looked like it would be good.
Whoa, you've not seen The Woman in Black?
No. I'll check that out.
You need to get off the podcast and watch it right now.
Oh, yeah, is that good? Oh man, that's interesting. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
You know what's a good one is The Changeling with George C. Scott.
Yeah, I would say that too.
That's
Oh
a creepy
man.
movie.
Yeah.
Now that's a very scary movie that can take mundane things and make them scary, like a ball bouncing down some steps.
Yes.
You know. So, and of course, having George C. Scott in a horror movie.
Oh yeah. Well, look at him in Legion too, Exorcist 3. He was really good in that too.
The Awakening. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
Maybe not.
The Awakening.
The Uninvited. It was an old movie, I think from the 40s, maybe.
Oh,
that was scary, but I don't have a strong memory of it. Just that it was scary.
Yeah, me too.
Another one I like is Stir of Echoes with Kevin Bacon.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very good. And
out more.
Sorry, what, Scott?
I need to get out more.
I'm sure more will occur to me later that I'm just not thinking of. You know.
The original Fog. The Fog.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Fun, like an EC comic on film.
Excuse me, one of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Kelly argues with me about that one. I think it's great, and he just says it's so-so.
Oh yeah.
Trying to think of others, but I think that's all that comes to mind for me right now, as far as movies go. What about TV shows? You mentioned The Haunting of Hill House, but are there any other TV shows that you like that are?
What is that one? what is the one that has Candle Cove and all? And what is that series? Channel Zero.
Channel Zero, yes.
There's been three seasons of that, and I liked the first season. I love the second season, and the third I wasn't too happy about.
Now
But
this is about. I've only seen a couple of episodes, but can you give the synopsis? Because it's about.
they take creepy pasta stories and they flesh them out into a series.
Yeah.
And the second one was No End House or something like that. It was that these people went into this house and they got into this other reality and they couldn't come back out very easily, and it was really intriguing. I thought that's a good series. I'd watch a fourth season of, even though, like I said, the third season to me was disappointing.
I watched the first couple of episodes. I stopped because I was paying for them. You know, I had to buy them off of Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think they're free in some way. I don't remember if it's because they're on Prime or whatever. But yeah, thanks for the reminder. I'll have to go back and watch those now. I mean, I love creepypasta.
Yeah. And Candle Cove, the premise being that there's this children's show that people kind of remember. They could swear they've seen it, but there's no evidence that it ever existed. So that's
right. I love that premise.
Yeah, I like things like that.
Yeah. Creepypasta. Speaking of creepypasta, have you read Pen Pal?
Pen Pal?
Yeah.
No, is it a novel?
It's either I don't know how many words it is. It's either a thick novella or a small novel.
Mm-hmm.
It's by a guy. It's by a guy by the name of Dathan, Dathan Arbach, Auerbach.
No, I've not heard of it. I think
I will tell you, and I am not exaggerating, that this is one of the creepiest books that I have read in my life.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And if you haven't read it, anyone listening, don't read up about it. Don't even look at the synopsis on Amazon if you can help it. Just get the book and start reading it. And see if you don't agree with me. It is extremely creepy.
That's compelling. Very compelling. That's quite an endorsement.
Yeah. I've read thousands of books in my life. That's one of the creepiest. It's got to be in the top 5.
Is it kind of like a ghost story, or is that?
I'm not answering any of your questions about it.
One of my favorite ghost story writers is M.R. James, and I know huge influence on Scott, but he didn't write always about conventional like ghosts, like the.
True.
His horrors are more original and disturbing than that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about? Are there any books that you reread for Halloween? And if not, are there any books that sort of just remind you of autumn and Halloween and so forth?
Oh,
You've really enjoyed.
Jeffrey's short story, The Yellow House. That's been one of my traditions for years. It's very atmospheric, and it just really is a great Halloween tale. It's a great story in general, but it's set on Halloween and has a lot of Halloween atmosphere and a real classic feel in ways. The Yellow House by Jeffrey Thomas.
Thanks.
What collection is that in?
It's in a book. I have a short story collection called I3A.
Yes.
But also, I have 3 Halloween themed short stories that I put together in a little Kindle book called Halloween Masks. It's only like $2, and it has the Yellow House. It has Post 153, which is inspired by our father. He's the protagonist of that, and another story called October 32nd. And I have those 3 Halloween stories in that little Kindle book called
Halloween Masks.
Halloween Masks. Yeah, it's like $2, and so the Yellow House is in there.
I'm pulling it up right now. That sounds great. I'm gonna get that.
Oh, cool.
I'm gonna go back to books, but I just forgot to mention when it comes to movies, Halloween movies. I think it was about 10 years ago, the movie Trick or Treat.
Mm.
I, I can't recall if I've seen it.
It's kind of 4 stories in one. It's framed by another story, if I remember right, and it's just very, very atmospheric. It's very much
right.
I mean, it's just yeah, you should watch it. Any fan of anyone who's into Halloween should watch Trick or Treat.
Interesting.
It had to grow on me. I didn't like any of the characters, but when I took it for what it is, it feels to me sort of like a movie version of a graphic novel in a way, but
Exactly.
really atmospheric. And now that I look back on it, I appreciate it more than when I watched it.
Yeah.
I don't recall seeing it, but
And Trick or Treat is it's not trick or treat, just the letter R in the middle. So for those who want to look it up and rent it or buy it. FYI, for anyone listening, I just looked up Jeff's book, his collection of Halloween tales, those 3 stories, and it's also on Kindle Unlimited. So if you're part of that, if you pay for Kindle Unlimited, you can read this for free. So, and if not, it's only $1.99. So
something that occurred to me before we get too far away from, we were talking about ghost movies.
Yes.
And I forgot the whole Japanese horror genre. Great movies like Ringu and Ju-on, The Grudge and Ring. Those to me are really cool ghost movies that I would throw out there too.
Anybody one of you guys want to mention more books? I've got some too that I could mention.
There are not, again, like with movies, it would be a rare thing for me now to reread a book or even a short story because I've got so many things I will never get to. So it's like sometimes I'll see somebody on Facebook say, every year I reread Stephen King's The Stand. I'm like, what? You read my books. You got to reread that giant ass book again, every year.
That's a project.
To me, life's too short. So I don't reread things really, it would be rare. It happens once in a while, but.
I do sometimes, just because I want to get lost in that particular book again. But it's got to be, obviously, it's got to be something that I really, really love. You get to our age and you start to realize you only have so many hours left in your life, so many days left.
Well, for instance, like I told you how I rewatched Halloween 3 last night. And I thought, boy, when was the last time I watched it? 20 years ago, 30 years ago? And if it's going to be 20 or 30 more years before I get to it again, well, that's not going to happen. So I'm thinking like, this is probably the last time I'm ever going to see this movie.
Well, on that morbid note, of course, you've always got The October Country, right, by Ray Bradbury. With this famous, I believe this is the one with the famous quote about autumn, but I don't remember for sure. I've actually got on my shelf list. I've got Halloween themed books right here. October Dreams is a huge anthology of stories. This thing is just huge.
Who's the publisher of that?
The publisher is it's edited by Richard Chismar and Robert
Cemetery.
I must be missing the publisher. Oh, I'm sorry. It's Cemetery Dance. And there's an October Dreams 2, which I think is just as good. Then there's Paula Grand's anthology, Halloween, Magic, Mystery, and the Macabre. And this one is, it's right here. This one, someone sent me, it's new, edited by Stephen Jones. The Mammoth Book of Halloween Stories.
Oh, cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
The Mammoth Book of Halloween Stories, and I've not been able to get into this yet, but I'm sure I'll love it. It's got Ramsey Campbell, Neil Gaiman, Joe R. Lansdale, Lisa Morton, and so forth. A lot of talented writers.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, and I know people who do this every year.
Oh yeah.
A Night in the Lonesome October by
Rogers Zelazny.
Rogers Zelazny. And what they'll do is they'll read a chapter a night starting on October 1st.
Oh yeah, oh that's cool.
So yeah, it's
the title comes from a poem by Poe, but I can't remember which poem is it. Is it?
Yeah.
Ullalum? Was it Ullalum?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Let's see here. That's probably most of the ones that I could mention, except for, well, I'll throw one last one in there. There's others, but The Night Country.
Oh, Stuart Anand.
Stuart Anand, yeah, and this thing just drips Halloween and autumn. Let me just read just a bit from the flap. At midnight on Halloween in a cloistered New England suburb, a car carrying 5 teenagers leaves a winding road and slams into a tree, killing 3 of them. One escapes unharmed, another suffers severe brain damage. A year later, summoned by the memories of those closest to them, the 3 who died come back on a last chilling mission among the living. Talks about ghost story and the tradition of Ray Bradbury and Shirley Jackson, and that's dead on, I think. My voice has been going the last couple of days, so I won't massacre this first couple of paragraphs by reading them. But the first paragraph, well, let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4. The first 4 or 5 paragraphs are just so, they're one of my favorite.
Very evocative.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's just, it's a really great beginning. One of the best beginnings to a book that I've ever read. The Night Country by Stuart.
Something like that. Certain things speak to your aesthetic.
Yes, absolutely.
They resonate with you in terms of what you expect of the holiday and the vibe that you like to cultivate. And
yeah, well, I'll just say this: if you love Halloween, if you're really into Halloween, if you're really love autumn, you should read this book. And if you love ghost stories, you should read this book. So that's what I've got as far as books.
How about?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Oh, Octoberland. Yeah, talk about that.
I have a short story called The Copper Mask. It takes place on Halloween night in 1830, and Jeffrey has a short story. Is The Post is in here, Jeffrey?
That's the one. Yeah, it's one of the stories that is in Halloween Masks. Yeah, Post 153.
Right, which is
It was
awesome.
first appeared in that book. That has some good contributors to it, if I recall. I can't remember everybody's name. Is
Charlie
Rick
Stephen Mark Rainey.
Okay.
Rathbone, Monica J. O'Rourke, Tracy Moore, Corinne DeWinter, Trent Jameson, Lauren Halkin, Robert Morris. Names I'm not real. William Peterson, Jeremy C. Shipp.
Oh, cool. I've forgotten. I haven't looked at the book in a while.
And cool cover.
Yeah, that was a really cool cover.
Someone watching live says that, and I just lost it. Oh, here it is. I enjoyed Scott Thomas's story and My Peculiar Family. Agatha.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
So
great to hear. I haven't really heard any feedback about that.
What is that book?
That book. I'll fetch it.
Okay.
There he is. Okay. My Peculiar Family.
Oh my gosh, I don't have a copy of that.
Edited by Les Rosenthal, Derek and Brian Belanger. The premise was we were each given a picture of an old tintype picture, and we had to write a story in this fictional collective history of the fictional family here, based on the tintype. And I had this kind of creepy old lady. I wish I could find her. And I wrote a ghostly tale to go along with the tintype I had to work with.
I assume that each author was given a different picture.
Yes, yes.
Unlike the Sea of Flesh and Ash, where you guys were
Right,
given the same.
right.
So,
Pretty cool project.
all right, I'm gonna have to check that out, Scott.
No, I'm so glad. And who was it that liked it?
I don't have a name. Just says Fritty Kitty. So
I
might be
think.
somebody I know or somebody I don't know.
Oh.
But that was a nice thing to say. So thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Transmissions from Punktown.
Oh yeah, transmissions from Punktown. Yes.
What is Punktown for people who don't know?
Punktown is a setting that I created, and I've written a lot of short stories and novels based in the setting. It's a far future city, a huge city where a lot of different races from other worlds and all these different sentient beings have come to colonize there and interact with each other. And so, like I said, I've been writing about it for decades, and the stories don't. The plot lines of the stories don't really interact too much. What the stories all have in common is the setting. It's very rare for me to reuse a protagonist from Punktown. And so Transitions from Punktown is a shared world anthology where the editor, Brian Sammons, invited other writers to come in and write Punktown stories. So he got quite a list of people willing to play in my sandbox. And he asked me for 2 stories. And so what I actually did, though, is I kind of cheated. I wrote one story that takes place in 2 different time periods. And these 2 halves bookend the whole anthology. And there are a lot of cool people in there, like Paul Tremblay and Nick Mamadis and a lot of Christine Morgan. A lot of cool people are in that book, Ian Rogers. And so it's really cool that to see what these people did with my setting. And these stories are remarkable. They're so much fun. And it was very gratifying reading them. You know, Brian would pass them along to me so that I could just go over them, just to make sure there were no glaring inconsistencies. You know, but Brian was the actual editor for the book, though. And so that book will be coming out from Dark Regions Press. It's currently part of a Kickstarter program they have going on. It has 1 more week to go. It's called the Dark Regions Press Halloween Grab Bag. And the Kickstarter is funding 3 books. One of them is called Stranded. I think it's the theme is Island stories. And the other one, what was it called? Let me just call it up. There's all kinds of perks and things you can get through this, and 50% off any Dark Regions book. All these different things depending on the level. But the three anthologies this Kickstarter is funding are Stranded. It's called Lone Survivor: Deserted Island Horror Stories, Transmissions from Punktown, and Halloween Haunts, which has authors such as Richard Chismar involved in it. And so it's, you know, people should check it out. I'm looking at it right now. It's got gazillions of possible perks for.
Well, I'm going to make a prediction, and when it comes to pass, everyone remember that you heard it here first. And the prediction is, Punktown one of these days is going to be a Netflix series or a Hulu series or a Amazon Prime series, something like that. It won't be made into a movie because it's just too rich. There's too many different stories to tell. But it would make a wonderful, almost unending TV series.
Thank you. So many people have said that. It just seems like it should be, but you know, hopefully. I mean, there are some things I really can't talk about there's always possibilities. But just the fact that there is a transmission from Punktown, there's a Punktown graphic novel that is still the guy who wants to make this happen is still seeking funding for that. There's a Punktown role-playing game that was recently released. which was also funded by a Kickstarter. And so there's a lot of people who want to play in Punktown either as a writer, as a game player, as an artist, and so forth. And so it seems like it would be a natural for a television program. I'm a little biased, but so one can hope. There has been motion picture interest in the past. Things didn't pan out, but or nothing came to fruition. But like when my novel Deadstock came out 10 years ago or a little over, it got a starred review in Publishers Weekly, and right away the editors told me, Ridley Scott's production company asked for a copy of it when they read their write-up in Publishers Weekly. Nothing came of it, but it's just cool that when you get somebody's attention like that. Once in a while I'll get a call or an email, and are the rights for Punktown available? And I'm like, yeah, and okay, if our client wants to go through with it, we'll get back to you. And so hopefully while I'm still alive.
I just don't see, you could get that call 2 weeks from now, or it might be 10 years from now, but I just don't see how it won't happen. You know what I mean?
One can hope.
At some point, everything will fall into place perfectly, and it'll happen, I think.
I hope so, because right now in my bank account, I've checked, I have $1.54 in my bank account today.
Oh my God.
So yeah. Hey, if you're a movie person thinking about it, please,
Well, if you I just remember me when you're rich and famous, and be sure to still take.
I will, Dave. Don't worry. I'm getting them already.
Funny thing about that is actually once in a while somebody calls me Dave, and I know it's because my last name is Davis, and that's what.
They can't call you Dave as much as I get called Tom.
Oh, really? So you same thing.
Yeah, Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah. Well, if you want to get in the Halloween spirit, Scott Thomas has a book, many books, but Scott Thomas has a book called Over the Darkening Fields. And, oh man, that's one of my favorite books of yours, Scott. It's a collection. It's not a novel, it's a collection. And I don't know if I can do it justice. Say a little something about it, Scott.
It's broken down into 3 sections. The first part takes place in contemporary times in America. The middle part takes place in Britain in the past, and the last part is sort of like a long short story or a small novella set in an alternative Britain where women are blinded at birth, and all types of supernatural occurrences occur. But
comment on patriarchal culture.
It's atmosphere. It's ferric. It has a lot of my aesthetic in it. There's a tale called Halloween Tea, which is shameless indulgence in
Halloween tea.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one of the characters in Halloween Tea, if I remember correctly, thinks to herself about how she listens to old-time radio shows every Halloween.
Right.
So, yeah. And then there's a story, I don't remember the title. I don't have the book in front of me, but it's about these folks that help the homeless people, and something really strange happens. What was that title? Do you remember?
The Winter Census.
Winter Census.
Inspired by something they actually do in Boston, where once a year, I don't know if it was a church, I believe it was a church, or they would conduct a count of the homeless people. And for whatever reason, I came up with a story from that. And my inspiration for the supernatural aspect that we briefly get a glimpse of is actually inspired by A Christmas Carol, the type of sort of pagan aspect to some of the portrayal of the spirits, and so I shouldn't tell too much.
One of my favorite types of weird fiction and or horror stories is a story where something happens, something strange or paranormal happens, you know, and the protagonist is relating this, but he doesn't know why. He doesn't know where it came from, why it happened, what really happened. It basically is this weird thing happened to me once, and I can't explain it. You know, and done right, like it is done in that story. Um, you know, I love that.
Oh, thank you.
But yeah, you can really get into the Halloween spirit reading that book, all of it. But for me personally, especially the first third, you know, that set of short stories.
Right.
And Scott has a book called Midnight in New England.
That's another great one.
Yeah, more short stories.
Hmm.
And of course, Scott has a book called The Sea of Ash.
Published by Lovecraft eZine Press. That's a
Yes. And I'll tell you, one of the things that made me want to publish this book is, even though it starts in May, I believe, and ends in November,
right,
it just drips that autumn feel throughout the whole book. You know, so again, if you love Halloween, pick that one up too if you haven't already, or these other two books, or pick them all up. So
thank you, Mike.
Scott's
Written
writes spooky. Like, you know, again, I'm biased, but I think Scott's hard to touch for writing spooky. And not only that, but I think he has such an affinity for nature that his stories can capture very well the essence of Halloween, or of Christmas, of winter, of summer. And that way, he reminds me of like Thomas Hardy, where that poetic sense of really evoking a season, the countryside, nature. And nature is such a strong element in so many of Scott's stories.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it was written, Sea of Ash was written at a haunted house.
In Templeton.
Yes, here it is. There's where I wrote it.
You know what? I didn't even know that till just now. Wow. That's neat.
From 1774.
1774? You look good for your age. I think Scott just froze. I think it's you and me for a second here.
I think he's just absorbing your comment there. He's
I'm sure. I'd like to close this out. Hopefully Scott will just click the link and come back in here. But I'd like to close this out with maybe another story or three from you guys. Strange things that have happened to you. If there are any more.
There was one, and again, this is something that Scott and I both witnessed, but we have a different memory of it. And it was also my cousins Jody and Amy, and some other kids. Maybe they were neighborhood kids. And this was near where they lived. I don't even remember what town it was in. We were young at the time. And but there was a field not far from their house. And Scott and I and my cousins Jody and Amy, and these neighborhoods, because we all went out. And this was my cousins said there was a lot of creepy things going on at that house, where radios would go on and off, faucets would turn on and off. And I seem to have a vague memory that they said that there had been a ghost scene or whatever in this field. And I think we were getting it charged up in our minds. We were getting almost in that kind of mass hysteria state. And we came to this field, and I could almost picture it. And I saw, the way I recall it, a figure all in white, entirely white, run across the field. And everybody turned, screaming, panicking, and ran away. The funny thing about the story, though, when I talk about it, and I can't remember if this is the way Scott remembers it or if my cousins remember it, they saw somebody who was not bolting like I saw. I picture it as a young guy, the ghost of a young guy bolting, running. The way, I'd have to double check with Scott if he gets back, is a woman, like in a dress, like floating past. So the fact that one person seeing one kind of an apparition, another person seeing another, would tend to make me think there was, like, we created kind of a mass hysteria amongst ourselves with our youthful anticipation and dread and whatnot. But it's something that I remember, or think I remember, you know. But it was one of those things, one of those weird things.
I've told this story before, but again, we have some new listeners, of course, this year. Hopefully, every year. So I'll tell it again, but I'll be quick about it.
Mhm.
It was one night very late. My wife and I were. I don't even remember where we were. She would remember, but it's been 20 years ago.
Mhm.
We'd only been married 2 or 3 years, and we were driving down a 2-lane at night out in the country, and on our way back home. I think we had been at someone's wedding. I'm not sure. It doesn't really matter though. But suddenly, I don't know, 20 or 30 feet ahead of us, we saw what looked like to me, and realized that there's like woods on either side. It's really dark. There's no other cars anywhere. So that's the setting. And what looked like to me a two-dimensional upright shadow of a person running from the left side of the road, and,
Oh,
from those woods there,
yeah.
over the road to the right side of the road and disappearing into those woods.
Mm.
And we were both like at the same time going, "Did you see that?" And we both saw the exact same thing.
Hmm.
And it's one of those things I've never found an explanation for. Probably won't ever.
Mhm.
I've told this story to a couple people, and they talk about shadow people. If you Google shadow people
Mm.
online, you'll get a lot of results about the supposed shadow people.
Mhm.
But who knows? I don't know what it was.
Yeah. But it's provocative that you both saw it, like that
Yeah.
thing, that figure that my ex-wife and I thought we saw, like, oh no, Sarah just sent me a text that his phone died. Oh,
Okay, that's all right. We're about to wrap up anyway.
yeah.
So, um, yeah, we both saw it. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a wolf, or not a wolf, a dog, or something crossing the road. It was just looked like a two-dimensional upright shadow running across the road.
That's creepy.
That's as close as I can get to describing it.
Hmm.
So,
That's very creepy.
yeah, it was pretty
Sometimes,
creepy.
sometimes your mind, when I'm driving, sometimes I'll see a mailbox or something, and it's a figure, and it's right down, detailed right down to the clothes, or they wearing a hat, whatever. You get a little bit closer, it's a mailbox. Your mind can, our imaginations are instantaneous. This is how, look at how we can encapsulate a whole dream in just seconds.
Yeah.
We're remarkably, everybody is a remarkable storyteller when it comes to dreaming. We can make the most elaborate and insane things. It's just not all of us can put that on paper later. Our imaginations are instantaneous, and because we are human beings, we put everything into anthropomorphic terms. Like I said, you'll see a mailbox. It's a person. Oh no, it's just a mailbox. I remember one time I was very tired. I was working second shift, and I would come home and stay up all night and writing whatever and sleep during the day. And I remember I was pacing in my kitchen, and I was really tired. And I looked down, and there was this crouching, horrible figure. It was before Twin Peaks came along, but I would compare it to like Bob, Evil Bob in Twin Peaks, this crouching, nasty-looking figure. And it was vivid. It was like as vivid as any human being. And in an instant, it was gone. And I know that and I don't think it was a ghost. I was pacing from a light room to darkness, and pacing and tired. And in that transition, my imagination was able to instantly imprint some scary thing just to freak me out. And I have no doubt about it, that it was my imagination. So that child, that's really complicates these incidents that we experience, separating the reality from the possible something more. Difference, like with the story that you're telling, is two people saw the same thing.
Right. That gives it more weight. If it had just been me, I would probably never tell the story.
Yeah,
But I would just
that's
think
more
it was-
provocative. Now, like, oh, now what happens when the two people see the same thing? It's not like the two of us seeing something in the field where we saw like an entirely different thing. Scott, what did you say when we were in that looking at that field with Jody and Amy and you and me, and we thought we saw something go across? What did you see? Oh no, we can't hear you.
we can't hear you.
Oh,
Sorry,
Scott,
buddy.
we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Oh,
Too
man,
bad we don't have a phone anymore. That's
uh,
okay. We're about to wrap up anyway, so.
yeah.
Well, we mentioned Scott's books,
Mhm.
some of Scott's books. Don't forget, everyone, about Halloween Masks, A Trio of Tales
Thank you.
by Jeffrey Thomas.
Mhm.
It's
Yep.
$1.99 or free to read on Kindle Unlimited.
Mhm.
I didn't know that was out there. I'm going to
Oh, cool.
pick up a copy.
Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah. So what are you guys going to do? I guess Scott, we can't hear from Scott right now, but what are you going to do for Halloween this year? You take your kids trick-or-treating?
I'll take my kids trick-or-treating, and even though I don't live in that town anymore, I always take them to Westboro, Massachusetts, because that's where I grew up, and that's where I used to go trick-or-treating. And in the area where I live, I'm in a very rural area now, so I'll pick up my son, take my daughter, and we'll go trick-or-treating in Westboro.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I will be listening to old-time radio shows, the spooky ones that we mentioned, and some others. I'll probably pick a movie to watch Halloween night. I don't know what yet, but I'll pick something.
Hey, you ever heard some of Lovecraft's adaptations, like Ronald Coleman doing the Dunwich Horror for suspense?
Yeah, I don't think I have.
Check that out. That's a good one. Ronald Coleman, suspense, Dunwich Horror. And then there was a show, I think it was a British show called Black Mass. I don't know who the person was, but they did a nice adaptation of The Outsider and Rats in the Walls.
Yes, I'm familiar with that show. That's a good show.
Yeah.
Scott, can we hear you yet?
Oh,
that's a no.
no.
No worries, brother. We're about to wrap up anyway, so don't worry about it. Your phone lasted almost long enough, so no problem.
That's good.
Well, I want to wish everyone a happy Halloween. We'll do this again next year with these guys, as always. Next week on the podcast, we have, hang on a second, Mike Carey, author of The Girl with All the Gifts.
Awesome.
And, other books. Comics too, I believe he's done.
Cool.
Anyway, happy Halloween, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Scott and Jeff, thanks for doing this with me here.
Thank you so much, Mike, for having us. This is always fun.
And we were almost glitch free, so I'm happy. So.
Yeah. It's
all right. Our track record this year is better than last year. So
yeah, it was fun.
If you've got some Halloween stories to tell, or some traditions you want to share, please feel free to email them to me, and I'll share them with Lovecraft eZine followers if you'd like me to. It's lovecraftezine@gmail.com. So thanks, guys.
Thanks again, Mike.
And we'll see everybody next week. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.